And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at a game from Osprey designed by Martin Wallace called Wildlands. In this game, according to the back of the box, the great darkness has fallen, and shards of crystals has been scattered across the earth. Yeah. I've seen that before. There's always shards of crystals around. You got to collect them, and you got to go around and fight people. This is a multiplayer, tactical light combat game with miniatures and card play. And you're just running around in a dungeon or around an area trying to pick up crystals and knock each other out. So I heard about it, thought, looks interesting. When I opened it up, very impressed with the components, but is there a good game? Let's find out. When you play the game, you're going to pick one of the two sides of the board. So you have like an outside area and an inside area. The only difference between the two, I mean, they're different maps, obviously, but there's also some areas here where it's harder to get into. Some areas, it's basically like a elevation thing where it costs one card to move in and two to move out. And they look very different. But each board has 42 spaces. Each player is going to take a faction. There are 4 factions included with the game. So here we have the mages, where you have 4 mages and then this hulking guy who protects them. Here we have some pit fighters. That's a crew here. The ones I have out here that you can see are the gnomes. Each character comes with a miniature. You put on a little plastic base to show that it's your color. And you have a card for that miniature. This shows how many hit points that character has. You also have a card here, which shows you the distribution of cards in your deck. It shows you your 5 characters and how many times each symbol shows up in your deck. Speaking of deck, the players have a deck that's going to show the various characters in your deck, and you're going to be shuffling this and using it. There's another deck of cards here that is going to correspond to the numbers on the board, 1 through 42. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to be given 10 of these cards. You are secretly going to pick where your characters are going to start and putting those cards by those characters to show that's where those characters are. The other 5 cards you are going to give to the player to the left of you, and that player is going to place their color crystals. Each player has 5 crystals of their color on those spots. So this one says 18, so I'd put it down here in 18, and then here we have one on 17, which is right here. We got one on 29. There's 29 over here, and 8 and 28. There's 28, and here is 8. Now, you're trying to recover those crystals, and in fact, you're trying to get 5 points. You get a point from recovering a crystal, and you get a point from killing or taking out, doing the final blow on another player. On a player's turn, if they have any unrevealed characters, you must reveal one of those characters and place it on the board in that spot. You then can play as many cards as you want from your hand. At the end of your turn, you're only going to draw 3 cards. So if you play 5 or 6, you have a hand of 7. You can do more things, but then you'll have fewer actions on the following turn. When you play a card can be used for the characters whose symbol is on the card. If it shows their symbol on the card, you can use that card to move that character. Movement is pretty simple. It would just be to an adjacent spot over one of these gray lines that are on the board. Or, that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple. You can also use it for the action that follows it. This is a melee attack. This is a ranged attack. This lets you rally someone and move with them. Also, some cards have a banner at the bottom, which means anybody can use it for that action. So here, this player can only use it to move, this one can use it to rally, and this one can use it for a double ranged attack. They're the ones with their picture on the card. So as you play these cards, you can do actions with various people. You can reveal more than one person if you want to. Hey, this guy's at 37, and go around the board and do various things. When you attack another player, you can play a melee if you are in the same spot as they are, which will do a damage to them. It can be defended by the single melee because it shows a shield. You can do a double melee that will do 2 damage to somebody. Same thing, a ranged or a double ranged will do 1 or 2 damage to someone as long as you have line of sight. Line of sight is simply can your circle touch their circle without going over any blocking terrain, as long as it goes over gray lines. And they can also block it with a green shield, or they can block it with this wall symbol if they're in cover. How do you know if they're in cover? If their circle is white. Very, very simple. And then a magic attack will do 1 damage to everybody in the region. So, let's say there were 2 characters maybe here duking it out. If I do a magic attack into that region, they'll both take a damage, although that can be blocked by a shield from each of them. Other symbols that exist in the game is the rally, which basically lets you move and take someone with you. There are flying symbols, which let you move 2 spaces, and you can ignore the high ground so you don't have to worry about climbing things. And you can pick up a gem. One of these shards you can claim. When you claim a shard, you have to have 3 symbols that match the character that's there, or 3 symbols of a character who's been KO'd on your team, so that their cards aren't completely useless. If that's the case, that's a green one. But let's say there was a blue one here, and this character played 3 cards, they could claim this one. You can only claim your own color. Also, if you do the finishing blow to somebody, you then take their card as proof that you've taken them out, and that's worth a victory point. The first person to get 5 victory points is the winner. Finally, there are some wild action cards that are in the game. So there's a deck full of symbols. You have several of these in your deck. This can be used to move anybody 1 space. It can be used to draw 2 cards. Or it can be used to interrupt someone else. Whenever you're taking actions, you must take them 1 action, then another action, then another action. You do it that way because someone can interrupt. When someone interrupts you, they can take as many actions as they want from their hand unless they are also interrupted. They get to take at least 1. And then you just keep going around until all the interruptions are done. Then it goes back to the person whose turn it was, and they will finish their turn. That's it. You play until one player wins the game with 5 points. The components for this game are very, very nice. As you can see, I really like the miniatures. There's a nice insert here that comes with a plastic lid that goes on top of that. And then you can place the other tray on top of that. There's a tray for each of the different groups. Here you see this is another group here. Each group is a spot for their cards. I really like these cards. On one side they show you what blocks which you need about 3 seconds to memorize. But this is useful. The only thing I would complain about these is I don't care so much what's on mine. I care what's on everyone else's. The factions are fairly different. As you can see, this faction here is fairly well balanced. As composed to the pit fighters, you can see they're almost all melee attacks and defense. That's it. They have no range. They have no special movement or rallying. And then we have these guys here who have a whole lot of ranged and a ton of this rallying, be able to move together as groups. So each of the factions has a very different thing to it. You have these little red cubes here, which you will use for health points. And then the gems themselves are very nice and easy to see. And then the board, of course. I'm a really big fan of using this. This is really obvious. You cannot see from here to here. You just can't, because I draw a line from one circle to another, and they made the board really convenient in that matter. And if you ever get tired of looking at this side of the board, you simply go to the other side. Okay, I need to make something clear. This is most definitely a very light game. But that doesn't mean it is just not oodles of fun. It is a lot of fun. I really like the 4 factions. I like how all 4 factions are different. I tend to like the pit fighters. They're up close and personal. They get in there in hand-to-hand combat, and they can take the damage, they can deal it out. But if you're fast, the tinkerers, they can run across the board, work together in groups, and easily pick up the gems really fast. And then you got the spread out team. You got the mages who are pretty weak, so they got to be careful, but their range attacks can do a lot of damage. It's really entertaining. The interrupt action itself is a very unique and intriguing idea where basically I'll play the interrupt card, and now suddenly you were not expecting this to happen, and a guy comes out of the wall, gets you. Now, the interrupt action is really cool, but it's going to take some gameplay changes on people who move quickly. For once, the folks of us who aren't analysis paralysis people are being penalized for this, because we often go and play our moves like that. You can't. You see, I'm going to move, now I'm going to attack, now I'm going to attack. You just have to do some pausing, and there in the game says you can play where you just basically play the card, put it on the table, do the action, then put the card in the discard pile. and that gives people time to take, to interrupt you, because interrupts can happen. Those 5 cards that you have, sure, you can use them to move anyone anywhere. You can draw 2 cards, which is tempting. It's basically an extra card, or that interrupt action, and knowing when to do that can allow for some very fun, entertaining times. This is not a long game. We're talking 30, 45 minutes at the most. I like the line of sight in it. It's very simple. I like the miniatures and components are fantastic. I like the asymmetricalness of the sides. And sometimes I just want to sit down and play a fun little card game. And that's what it is. You're running around in combat, and when it's done, you might have had better tactics than me, and maybe this turn I just managed to outthink you or outmaneuver you, especially in a multiplayer game. Maybe you just happen to block all my hits, and then Sam comes in and steals the final kill. Or I'm about to go get that gem from so-and-so and I win the game, but Mandy interrupts my turn and then takes me out with her cards. That sort of thing is very, very possible, but it's just silly, entertaining fun, and yet feels like you have a lot of good decisions to make over the course of the game. Even though it's light, it doesn't mean it's fluffy, doesn't mean it's just accidental. You have to think, how am I going to play and utilize this? There's also an expansion out there, which I'll talk about another time, which brings in Undead, which I think is a neat addition to the game too, and even adds a bit of a game change to it. But even without that, this is a really solid, cool little game. I very much recommend it. Just really fun. I think sometimes we talk about games and all the in-depth, the thinking, the strategy, and sometimes we poo-poo on lighter games. We're like, that's kind of too light. This is going to be too light for some people. But sometimes I just want to have a rocking good time. And what's weird is usually that involves rolling dice. I like rolling dice. This game has no rolling dice and yet still manages to be very entertaining, fast-paced tactical combat. I like it. Dice Tower Judgment, excellent.